Hey guys, welcome back to another Blender 2.8 tutorial, and today I'm going to show you how to make this Mario brick block completely in Blender from scratch. So we're going to be doing some modeling and some shading, and I want it to look as close to this as possible. I'm pretty sure this is directly from the game, but I do want to do a more photorealistic version of it, so it's going to have some shininess and kind of look more physically accurate. And since we're going to be using this as reference all the time, and I don't want to have this open, I'm just going to close this and bring this reference directly into my scene. So we're going to begin by deleting everything, this default scene. So A to select everything. I'm going to put the keyboard shortcuts up here so you can quickly see them and know what keys I'm pressing. So A to select everything, X, and then delete to get rid of your default scene, and then we want to add in our reference. So Shift A to add, and then, let's see, we need image, reference, and then navigate to wherever you have your reference. And I found this on Google Images, so you should be able to get the exact same image of a brick block. And you can see it's already facing me. It's import such that it's facing the direction where you imported it. So first thing we need to do is to center it in terms of rotation. So N for properties opens up this menu, and then we're going to zero out this rotation, and then just pick an axis and make it 90 degrees. Okay, so now we have our reference in here. I'm just going to back it up a bit with G for grab and then Y. So now whenever we are modifying our cube we're going to add, we can actually see what we're doing without having a separate window open. So N to close this. So we're going to start off with the cube, obviously. So Shift A, Mesh, and then Cube. And you can see that this cube is beveled. You can see this bevel here, here, and here. And this bevel seems to only have one segment, but again, I'm doing a kind of artistic, photorealistic version of this. So I'm just gonna make it a bit smoother. So select our cube, which we can call brick block. Select your cube, tab for edit mode, so now we can edit everything. I'm going to go into edge selection with 2, or you can just hit this button if you don't want to do it the super fast way, which is what you should want to do. Always use the hotkeys, although it is kind of hard to remember. But either way, select all your edges. So select all your edges, Control B to bevel, and let's just bring that out and scroll up to add some segments. So something kind of small, but smoother than the reference. Okay, so I like that. And now what we have to do is add these cuts in so we can make the bricks, because right now this is all, it's all on the same height. So first of all, we need a loop cut going down the middle here. I'm just going to treat this face right here as this front one, the side one is the side, and obviously the top is the top. And it's kind of great that we have these 3 visible, because this is going to be the same as the one in the back, the top is the same as the bottom, etc. So we actually have all the information we need. So let's start with this middle cut. So Control R for a loop cut, and I'm going to align it this way. Click, right click to center, and we now have our loop cut. And notice that this actually has some width to it, so it's not this single loop cut. So we're just going to bevel this as well. Control B, scroll down for one segment, and then something like 0.04. Just a tiny, tiny little bevel over here, so it has some width. And then I think I'm just going to keep doing this for the rest of the cut. So for all of these, 0.04, because we want consistency. So we also have Control R, 2 cuts here. Click, right click, and I think we need to separate these a bit more. If you look at this middle brick over here, it's like 1.5 times wider than it is tall. So I'm just going to scale it on the Z-axis to separate them just a little. And then Control B, 0.04. Perfect. Now let's add the cut here and the cut here that you see on either side of this brick. Control R, I don't know where that went, let's try that again. Control R, Control R. Perfect. And now we just Shift Alt click to select this loop as well, and Control B and bevel by 0.04. So now we have all the cuts that we need on this face over here. So moving on to this one, you see we have one in the middle and then 2 on the sides, same thing. Control R right here, and then actually before we add this one, let's bevel by 0.04. And we already have these horizontal ones. It goes around this entire cube, which is nice. So we can just add a cut here, a cut here, Shift Alt click, and then we want to bring them closer together because you notice this brick right here, it's not this wide. So scale it on the x-axis until it feels about right, and then bevel by 0.04. I think that should be good. And then the good thing about this is we're actually done making cuts. The cuts we made here and the cuts we made here actually made all the necessary cuts that we need up here, and I'll show you how that is the case. So let's actually do a save. I don't want this to crash. I don't think it will crash, but not a bad idea to save. So we'll call this bricks tutorial. Okay, so now what is the game plan? Well, I'm just going to select some faces, and then I'm essentially just going to extrude them to make these bricks. Of course, it's not going to look this funky unless you want some kind of funky Mario looking thing. So I'm going to be using circle select, C for circle select. You can drag to select and then hold shift while you drag to deselect, and then right click to disable circle select. So we need this corner cube, which there's one here and on the bottom, and there should be 8 of them in total because it's symmetric on every axis. So C for circle select, select all these, and then there's this gap in between, which is why we put it, and then we have these. Make sure you select everything, and then we just do this for all 8 corner bricks. And this is probably the cleanest way to make this type of model without doing any kind of sculpting, which is why I wanted to do this tutorial. It's kind of an exercise of turning reference into 3D models in a logical way. So yeah, I do think these loop cuts we placed are the best that we could have placed, although I'm sure that there's some more efficient way. Let's see. So in this front, you see we also have this center brick. So I'm just gonna shift click to add and then control click so it fills in this path. Shift click up to here with a control click, and just keep repeating this. Here we have another center brick, and we're just gonna keep going around our mesh until we have it all. Okay, so now we have this middle layer, and then of course we just need the top and the bottom. We have our center brick up top, as you can see from our reference, and it's a great thing we imported it in here. Because, you know, oh, by the way, something I just want to mention, right now we are in solid view, which makes everything, you know, this white material, but reference still has texture even if you're in solid view, which is going to be important in a bit. Just wanted to mention that. Let's just get the rest of these cubes, or I guess they're bricks, not cubes. This one has a center brick. Whoa, that one has a center brick. And I'm pretty sure we should have selected everything. We can just make sure. Okay, perfect. And now, again, the game plan is to extrude, but if you click E to extrude, you get some like abstract Mario art that you can hang up in some kind of art conference, which is not what we're going for. So we need to change how we're extruding. Go to your toolbar. If you don't have this, just click T, and that, you know, enables and disables this. I'm going to go to extrude region, which is what it's set at default, and we're going to change it to extrude along normals. Well, what's this going to do? Well, now you see it's extruding differently. And here we have the classic sci-fi Mario look. So instead of that, we're just going to extrude outwards. And do it until you think that it feels about right. I think this should be pretty good. Or, you know, we can do it a bit more than that, just so these bricks feel like they're coming more out. And then you see these bricks are also a bit beveled, so we want to bevel them. But the issue is if you go into edge mode and then, you know, just keep alt clicking until you have everything you need selected, it's going to take absolutely forever. So the quick trick is we just want these edges that are surrounding the selected islands. And of course, Blender does have a feature for this. So select loops, select boundary loop, and it does exactly what we want. One of my favorite little tricks that I found inside of Blender. So now when we have these selected, we can Control B to bevel, and it does exactly what we want. We can play with the number of segments. I'm thinking I'm gonna make a smooth version with another segment like that. And I'm liking the look of this. So now we're pretty much done with the geometry, not the shading, but just the modeling. You see that there's some flat shading going on here. You can actually see where one face ends and another begins. You know, this is the wireframe, and then in solid, you can still see this flat shading. To fix that, of course, we need to change it to smooth shading. So to do that, I'm going to do search, which for me is spacebar. For you, it might be F3, depending on your settings. If you go to edit preferences, if I can find preferences, or is it file? Or no, I was on file. Edit preferences, and then you go to, it's either navigation, input, or hotkeys. There we go. If you go into key map, you can set your spacebar action to be search, which is what I have it as. But again, you could just click F3, and then we'll do shade smooth. Perfect. So it makes this smooth, it makes everything else look absolutely horrible. So how do we fix this? We want smooth here, but then kind of like flat shading in between here. Well, we can actually set a tolerance for this. So I'm just going to select this object, go into object data, normals, and then just enable this checkbox that says auto smooth. And what did this do? Well, you see that this auto smooth has a angle tolerance of 30 degrees, and this number basically says what angle should I look for smoothing, and then if I'm larger than this angle, what should I do? So if I make this bigger, you see that some of this actually begins breaking. So you want your tolerance pretty low for this one. So 30 happens to work here. Okay, so now we have fixed that issue. And now we want to make sure we have two materials, a kind of clay brick material for most of this, and then this interior black material. So we're going to separate it into two materials. And for this black one, we kind of want, you know, what's essentially a mask. We only want it in these crevices. So to make a mask, we're going to use vertex groups. And you can see in object data, we have vertex groups. Go into edit mode, and then what we're going to do is with face selection, is we're just going to select everything where we would have this black interior region. So that's an alt click, shift alt click, and then we're just going to keep selecting all of these. And there might be, I'm not quite sure, but there might be some clever trick for selection like there was with the boundary trick. I'm not aware of it, but if there is, I'm sorry that I'm doing it the long way, but honestly it shouldn't be that bad. It doesn't take that long. Plus, it's always a good exercise in selecting, because, you know, lots of shift clicks, shift and alt clicks. So it's important to know which to do. And we're going to make sure that we get every single side here, like that one and that one. And it's important that we don't have any gaps, because if we do, our material will also have these gaps. So make sure that this is comprehensive. Okay, so let's just make sure we did this correctly. Oh, missed one there. Okay, so far so good. Top, bottom. Okay, I think we're good. So once you have all of these selected, we can just turn this into a vertex group. And by the way, you know, vertex group implies vertices, but we here did faces. But notice that if I go into vertex mode, you know, the same thing is selected. And that's to say, if I select this face, or this vertex, this one, and this one, it's the same thing as selecting a face. So this face is these four vertices. It's the same thing. Okay, so now I have my selection back. I'm going to add a vertex group, which we're going to call interior, just to make sure our names make sense. And then we're going to click assign once we have, you can be in face selection too, it doesn't matter. But once we have all of this selected, we're just going to click assign, and then we can lock this. And to make sure that it actually worked, I've deselected everything. And then if I click select, you see that it restores this selection. So it does work. Okay, so now on to the shading, I guess. We're done modeling, which I guess means we should save. Okay, so now we are on to materials and shading. So we need two materials, you know, a clay brick one and this black interior. So I'm just going to add a new one, add another slot, and add a new one. And then for one of these, I'm going to make it red. And then for the other, we can just make it any other color, like green. And then, of course, we don't see anything, so we don't know which is which. but that's because we are in solid view, which can be confusing because you can actually see this reference texture, which is why I mentioned it a while back. So if we go into look dev or rendered, doesn't matter, you see this green one is kind of on top, so it's the one we see. So that makes this green one, it makes that our brick, or I guess I'll name it clay. And then for this red one, it's our interior. And then for this interior, we want it to show up, but only on this selection. So again, object data, click select to restore our selection. And then when we have interior selected, we'll just click assign. And you see, it did exactly what we want. So now it's just a matter of going back into object mode. Now it's just a matter of making this red black and making this green, clay. So to do this, I'm going to go into rendered view. Right now we're inside Eevee. And then we can go into our shading layout. Move this up. Okay. So since we're going for this photorealistic look, I'm just going to use some HDRI lighting instead of having, a light here and a light here. So I'm going to go into the world shading. Delete this background node with X, Shift A to add a texture, environment texture. Throw this into the surface input of the world output. So whatever we put here is going to be in the world output surface. And then what are we going to put in here? Just any HDRI. I don't really know which one of these is which. So I guess I can just pick one at random. Let's do this one. Okay, so now we have a HDRI selected. Of course, we don't see anything. That's because we're in look dev mode. So turn this into rendered. Okay, so this is, I guess, what we have, which kind of makes sense. There's brick surrounding it. Maybe we'll give us the right lighting, but we'll see about that. So I'm going to go into object shading. And then when we go into our material tab, we can switch between these, as you can see down here. So starting off with the interior, because it should be easier. I'm just going to keep this principled BSDF. I'm going to change the color into black till it feels right. No saturation, so it doesn't have any hints of red. And we just want it to be about the right shade. Its roughness should be pretty high, so it's not reflecting as much. Don't need any of this. And I'm actually going to change back into cycles and enable GPU compute. And this is just so we can see what we're doing more accurately with ambient occlusion and all this. We can make this a bit darker, maybe 0.04. Okay, and now we might come back to this, but let's go and work on the brick, or the clay. So the first thing to do is to get the right color instead of green. So we're going to open our color, and we're going to use this eyedropper tool, because we actually have our reference, so we can just click any of these shades that you think is representative of the color it should be. And just like that, we have something that's already a lot closer. And then we can just play with this, make it more saturated, maybe a bit lighter. Anything that kind of looks like clay. And I'm liking the look of this to begin with. I don't know if I want it more or less shiny. Maybe a little less shiny. So 0.6 on the roughness. Clay definitely isn't metallic, so no metallic here. No need for this. And now let's add a normal map so we get a bumpier looking surface. And by the way, go to render, go to film, and go to transparency to hide this background. So I want to add some bumpiness. So if we don't want to use a texture for this, we can just use some noises. So Shift A to add a texture, Voronoi texture. And by the way, if you go to edit, preferences, and then add-ons, and type in Node Wrangler, you'll find this add-on, which comes with Blender 2.8. Enable this because it lets us do this little trick. Control-Shift-Click, and it lets us see, this node feeding directly into the surface. And then we can do that here or here, just something very useful in Node Wrangler. So we're going to be using this Voronoi as our bumpiness. So we want it to be a little more fine than this, so maybe 40. Okay, that's a start. We can duplicate it. Shift D to do that. and then we can make this version a lot more intense, so something like, you know, 100. Oh, Control Shift, click to see that. Maybe 200. Yeah, and that's the fine detail we want. And let's kind of mix these together in some way. So we'll use some math nodes to do that. Shift A, and then I'm going to add a math node, which can be found in, let's see, it's Shift A and then Converter Math. So that's where you find it. So I'm just going to put these two nodes into our addition. So here's one of these, here's the other, and this is what happens when we add them. And you can kind of see what it's doing here. So I think one thing I'm going to do is, this is the big one. So before we feed it into this addition, which combines them, is I'm going to duplicate this, put this in between, and let's do a multiplication. So here we have this one, and now we multiply it by 0.5, which effectively makes it darker. And let's try something like 0.3, so that this is contributing a lot less than it was before. So it's not kind of, I don't want to use the word overexposing, but so the white in this node doesn't carry too much weight in the final calculation. And you see now this variation is a lot less intense, so this is what it was before, and here's what we've done to it. Just a little detail. Okay, so we take these nodes, G to move, and we want to turn this output right here into, you know, something that can be interpreted as a normal map in here. And right now this is just a black and white, you know, 0 to 1 image. So the way to convert is with Shift A, Vector, Bump. This bump node is very, very useful for stuff like this, because we can take this, put it as our height. Heights are, you know, black and white maps from 0 to 1, so not normal, but a height. And then we take this, which is now, you know, you can see it's a normal map. We get this weird looking shading, and you can see what this is going to do. We're going to get this cool looking bumpiness. And we can also invert and play with that. But we're going to take this and feed it into the normal of our principled BSDF. And you see now we have all this normal information. And you see that even though this is smooth shaded, you can kind of see where the breaking and the shading happens, and that's because the strength is very intense. That happens when your strength is crazy with normal maps. So even if we half it, that should help somewhat. Didn't help completely. But we don't even want it this intense either, so something like 0.2, something like that, 0.2. Yeah, that's more of what I'm going for. And you can see this is already starting to look a lot more like clay or brick or whatever you want to call it. I'm not quite sure what this distance does. Let's play with it. 0. Oh, I see. Can we bring it above 1? Yeah. So we can play with this too, but I'm thinking that I'm just going to keep it on default for now. We can always change our mind. And now we can play around with the roughness. You know, this reference isn't that shiny. I know in some other Mario games, the 3D bricks are a lot shinier. So let's just play around. Try 0.2 for super shiny. Yeah, that's crazy shiny. 0.8 for barely shiny. And I think I want something a little more shiny than before. I think we had 0.6. Let's try 0.5. Okay, I like the look of that. And if we always want to add, you know, just a bit more of this gamey, shiny feel, just add a bit of clear coat. This is a lot of clear coat, but this is just to, you know, emphasize the point. So if we do a 0.1 on this, so it's a bit subtle, bring up the clear coat roughness, we get a little something extra to this. Okay. I like the look of that, and we can actually make this color just a bit more interesting. Let's see, how do I want to do that? We could do a color ramp. We could try it. If we don't like it, we can always get rid of it. So color ramp. We can have one of our colors be using the eyedropper. This one. Let the other one be. You can scroll between 0 and 1 like this. So this is 1 right here. Let's get the same color. Whoops. The same color over here. So right now if we plug this into color, nothing should change. But we can change this one just a bit, you know, make it brighter. And let's see, what's the difference here? So this is before, after. Whoa, that's not what we want for after. So this is before and then after. It isn't really adding much, and that's because we kind of want to make this look a bit more complicated so it's not just this gradient looking thing. So for now I'm just going to get rid of this. One thing we can do to add some visual interest is we can add another shader. We could try a glossy. We're going to add a glossy shader and mix the two of them with a mix shader. And this is just to add a bit more variety to what we're doing. And right now you see it's going everywhere. It's mixing everywhere, giving it this metallic look. We only want this to happen somewhere, and then we're going to change the settings here. So as our factor, we can use a lot of things. We could try something like the layer weight is one interesting thing to try. Use facing. And you can kind of see what's happening here. So if I make it 1, it's happening everywhere. If I make it 0, it's happening nowhere. Something like 0.2, you see where it's creeping in. Here's what this mask looks like that. And then instead of having it be this shiny metal, we can have it be this reddish or orangish. Let's see, red, yellow, what looks good? Something like that. So we are now mixing this glossy, which has orange tones, and let's see, play around with the roughness, see what we like. So you see this is making some areas of it super duper shiny, depending on this viewing angle with the facing. I'm just going to do it with roughness 0.7. Okay, and let's see the difference. So this is just with the principled BSDF from before, and this is with this mixing. It kind of gives it this warmer, more interesting look. In materials, I'm going to go back to interior, and I've decided that I want this to look a bit rougher and also a bit darker. So all the way down. Okay, I like the look of that. Let's head back into our clay. Okay, and I think using the layer weight was the right choice. We can also use something like, you know, an ambient occlusion node, which for this object looks like this. So you see it's wherever this ambient occlusion is. You can play with the distance and all this, and you can use that as, let's go back to this one. So instead of the layer weight, you can use an ambient occlusion node to say, oh, where do I want this glossy to show up? But I think this was the right decision. Okay, I like the look of that. And also something important to note is all this shading we did is inside this environment here. So it looks the way it does here, but if we change it, so let me just remember what HDRI we're using so we can go back to it. If we change it, you see we get the same thing, but just different looks because the lighting that it's in is changing. And it's always important to do your shading in one HDRI and then change it and then maybe modify it a little, just so you make sure you kind of like the way it looks in all lighting conditions. And I do like the look we're getting in general, so you can just try a whole bunch of looks here. And you can also play around with color correction. I know that this one right here, fireplace, is super intense. You know, it's this very orange lighting. And here you see the light source from the fireplace is affecting this face of the brick block. And I get all my HDRIs from a website called HDRI Haven, which has royalty-free HDRI, so I highly recommend it. Ooh, this is super dramatic. This is this kind of fancy modern interior. I think I like this. I'm gonna stick with this one. And then since we're gonna do our render inside of here, we can make some final adjustments that are, you know, for this environment. So for example, going into object, I want to make this color a bit more saturated. So I'm going to take this and then bump the saturation just to get some of that color back, maybe all the way or something close to it. Yeah. Okay, I like the look of that. And we can make this roughness a bit higher, especially since this scene has such harsh lighting from this window, both these windows. Pick an angle we like. Inside layout, I guess, is the way to do it. Let's check out all the different angles we can have. Okay, I think I like this first one where we have one side is very dark. I'm gonna go into our render tab, film, and then enable rather, this transparency, so we can hide our background. And for properties, and we can either make a camera or stay inside this, no camera type view and change the focal length to something higher like 80. So it's as if we're using a 80mm lens on this view. And then we can also play around with this, contrast and brightness. So this is what it looks like with super high contrast, with super low contrast, and then we just want to pick. So this is what we had before. I think I'm going to edge towards less contrast, or maybe more. I think I'll just stay with base since I can't decide. Let's disable these overlays. And by the way, the reference, this reference counts as an overlay, as you can see. And look at this, by the way. I didn't even do kind of like the before and after. So here we have our before, this very flat, toon-shaded looking thing, and here we have our more kind of realistic but still very gamey take on the same thing. Just from that view, I know I want to make it a little less saturated, so let me just bring that down. Just a touch. Okay, now let's just set up our final color correction. So we like our contrast, and we can play with the exposure. So this is what it looks like with more exposure, and then with less exposure. So I'm just going to keep it at 0. You can also change the gamma of this, just to get a different look. Let's see. It started off at 1, so something like 1.1 looks fine. And then, of course, you can always add your depth of field and all this. But I think I am pretty happy with this. Let me just save. So this is how you do, my take on a Mario block from the game all inside Blender from scratch. So hopefully you learned a lot about the modeling process, how to take this and just get very efficient geometry. Some things you can do is you can melt these faces together to bring down your poly count. We have a poly count of 2,770, it looks like, which isn't that bad considering we're not using any displacement maps or anything like that. But that's the modeling. We also did a bit of shading, and yeah, that's pretty much all I have for you guys. So thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you guys on the next one.